Okay, well, hello everyone. Thank you for attending this webinar by Dr. Nasr. My name is Pat Bono, president of New York Bee Wellness, which is an educational, grassroots, charitable 501c3 organization. Its mission is to educate small-scale, sideliner, beginning beekeepers. We do have a YouTube site with past in-person and online presentations, including some by Dr. Nasr. We also conduct statewide surveys twice a year for non-migratory beekeepers in New York State. 2021 will be our 7th year of collecting data. New York Bee Wellness also sends out newsletters several times a year. New York Bee Wellness is reliant on donations so that it can offer webinars like this for free. Our presenter tonight has taught at one of our Train the Trainer workshops for New York Bee Wellness. He has a very distinguished and illustrious career teaching and conducting research. He is also a very friendly guy. Medhat, are you ready?
Yep, thank you. Thanks, Pat. It's always a pleasure to share this time with you talking about bees and what we learn from bees. Um, Thanks again, Pat, for inviting me to be part of this activities. And definitely the New York Bee Wellness, it's a very active group. I always enjoy talking to them, and they work for a good cause, keeping our bees healthy, deliver good information to the beekeepers so they can utilize this information in their bee yards and everyday activities. Um, Definitely, with the COVID situation right now, it made us even closer. And now we learn how to use this video and virtual meetings. And maybe some issues can happen through the presentation, but I hope things will go well. As Pat mentioned, if you have any question, please write it down and we'll make time at the end to answer those questions. Today, I would like to start talking about keeping pests and pathogen and honeybees or of honeybees in check. Before I start, I like actually to, okay, let's see here, to dedicate this presentation to Aaron Morris. He is a beekeeper from New York. He was actually the president of the upstate or the Empire State New York Beekeeping Association. He was also a teacher involved in bee wellness in New York. And he and I, we taught several courses and we used to do a lot of activities with the Eastern Apiculture Society. Recently, we lost him. And in fact, also, I lost my younger brother in December. And now in January, we lost Aaron Morris. And I hope, that will give us a little bit some of reminding us of all of this kind of good things they offer in their lives. To start my talk, we noticed, especially over the last several years, uh, the honeybees became part of our everyday thing. We hear about it in the media, especially in 2007. Once we learned about that colony collapse disorder, we start paying attention to the honeybees and we start talking about stressor for the bees they go through in their life. I try to make summary of all of these stressors first, and later on we are going to focus on the bee diseases and pests. First of all, I would start with beekeeping management. That's the most important actually stressor in the whole equation here about keeping bees. If you know nothing about honey bees and you start the beekeeping business itself, definitely your bees will die within short time because you don't really know much about the management. However, with education, practice, uh, and working with some others, attending some meetings like this ones, that will help you to develop your skills and become a good manager of the honeybees. In recent years, we start seeing, even when I was working still for the government, I get this strange phone call. My wife bought a beehive from Costco or one of those places, and I would like to start bees next spring. Do you know anything about bees? No, but where can I buy the bees? How can you start business without knowing even how to handle that? Even if I would like to buy a dog or a pet, I have to learn how to handle that. So this is quite important. Before you start, you need to have knowledge and experience. The second thing, we have to start talking about also what kind of bees we are going to keep in our operation. Or the bee genetics itself is quite an important component of the stressors the bees can go through. And that's you learn as you learn more about beekeeping management, you will understand what kind of bees you can keep in your location or in your operation. So that way it meets your expectation. Queen quality, for those guys who kept bees over the years, all the time we complain. My queen cannot stay in the hive more than 6 months. There are lots of supersedure. Quality of the queens already compromised, and the brood pattern is no good. The offspring is not good quality. So that's another factor we call it another stress can add to the bee performance. The weather itself and the climatic condition, that's quite important. Wherever you are going to keep the bees, you have to understand the prevailing conditions and weather condition around your operation. For example, I spent 10 years in California. The beekeeping in California was entirely different from where I am at in Canada. I also lived in Ontario for 10 years, just north of Buffalo. And the beekeeping in that area is entirely different. Even within Canada, I am right now in Western Canada and Alberta, where it is quite colder. So I have to understand my regions and how that will change my management to maintain keeping healthy bees and stay alive under some of these extreme weather conditions. One more stress factor, nutrition. And we can see recently there are lots of diets out there, and there's a lot of marketing about feed your bees and what kind of food available for bees to stay healthy, build the population. At the end of the day, make honey production. You have to prepare them for the winter, where there's no such honey flow or pollen flow. So you have to have enough food inside your colonies to get through the winter and early spring buildup. So the nutrition now, it became so important. As a matter of fact, last week, Pat and I, we attended a conference about honeybees, and there were several presentations. And I was quite interested to know that some of the diets right now, especially the protein supplement diet, start talking about high protein ratio in your diet as it has good value for the honeybees. Some of the protein ratio in some of these diets in the market right now, 45%, 50%, it became like uh, the more protein you think in your head, actually it's better for the bees. Now they are finding it is toxic to the honeybees. In fact, that phenomena, we knew about it since the 1970s. However, we forgot that. And right now we are thinking, oh, the more protein in the diet, that will help it have more bees. It is the opposite. That's why education is quite important. And it's quite important to know there is some way for marketing. It might not really apply to what we know about the bee biology and the requirements for having what I call it balanced good diet for the honeybees to develop and stay healthy. About the pest and pathogen, we are going to talk about it, and I'll start using some examples in my presentation with some focus actually on Varroa, Nosema, and American foul brood, as they are considered the most three important uh, diseases for honeybees nowadays. Pesticide. Uh, Pesticide is quite serious stress factor on honeybees. We always look at the pesticide used in crops and in the fields as highly toxic to the honeybees. That's correct. But also don't forget about the pesticide we apply inside the hives and sometimes overuse it or use off the label products inside the hives and kill our bees by ourselves. And later on, we point the fingers at the farmers who are using pesticide out in the field. So we have to have here better understanding of pesticide impact on the honeybees, either used in the field by farmers to protect their crops from their pest, or used by beekeepers in their own hives to protect the bees from other pests. So this is different kind of discussion, different kind of subject. We can discuss it some other time. Why it's so important right now to keep our bees healthy, especially for the pest and pathogen we are seeing it's already taken over most of our management actually. Keep in mind, if we keep our bees healthy, we can reduce our losses. As a matter of fact, when we see every single annual report about bee kill, either in the United States or Canada or now around the whole world, the first news we can see 40% of the bees died last year. Keep in mind, over the years, we used to have about 15%. That's the long-term average of bee kill in winter time. But we start seeing that number or that percentage of killed bees every year is in the increase. We try to look and study what is the cause of bee kill, and that's where it is so important for you guys, as well as any person keeps bees, to report their numbers when we do some surveys. I'm sure New York does some surveys. Be Informed does some surveys. Here in Canada, we do the same surveys. It brings to us what's the real picture of bee health outside as it's going on, and what kind of factors you might think it killed your bees. That helps us to develop what we call it management plan and address these issues. It will save us time. It will save us money. It improves the treatment efficacy. Uh, for that improvement of treatment efficacy, if you know your disease and at what level, that really will help you to decide what kind of medication you should use and what kind of management you should apply to your operation to keep the bees healthy. As I always say, it does help us to stay ahead of the curve. Um, for example, I always use a human, like every year we have annual checkup, and that really helps my doctor and myself to understand what kind of health issues it might develop in near future or maybe in the long term. And that way I can address it at the right time so I stay healthy and avoid this kind of side effects on my health. I always treat my bees the same way. I have to be the one all the time looking at my bees to figure out what is going on with my bees. So that's a kind of a practice and management practice I should keep in my mind whenever I look at my hive. Having the better understanding of your treatment and your pest itself, I can also understand if my treatment failed. So what does this tells us? How do I know my treatment worked or how my treatment failed? One thing, what we call it monitoring. In the old days, we really look at our bees and decide, is it sick or healthy? But we never followed up to see what level of sickness, what level of mite. So now, mite infestation. So now we have to understand the value of monitoring the disease. And we are going to go through some of these points later on in my talk. Overall, if I keep healthy bees free from pathogen and diseases with lower treatment as needed, for sure my honey quality will be in the top. I am not going to worry about residues. I'm not going to worry about any other um, contaminant and comes into my honey. But also that gives us one thing. I understand there's some guys, they say, well, I don't want to have any treatments in my hives. I always ask the same person, if you have some sickness and you go to your doctor and will tell you uh, for treatment, I highly recommend and I prescribe these drugs for you. Would you decide to take it or not? That's your own personal decision. However, it is your responsibility about your own health, as well as it is my responsibility if I keep my bees. And I know my bees right now has certain infection or has certain disease. The only way to treat my bees and keep them healthy, I have to use certain medication. As long as I'm using the prescribed medication according to the label and according to the recommendation, proper dose at the right time, not overusing it, and monitor once my bees are healthy, I should stop. So that really justifies to me the non-treatment versus treatment. When we talk about treatment, we are not pushing really to overuse any medication unless there is justification. You have to use this product to keep the bees healthy and alive. And that's really quite important. Overall, we understand the bee role in our agriculture system and our food security. Bees are major pollinators for our crops. The more we keep our bees healthy, that will secure the food source and food supply for all the human beings. So that's part of our responsibility. And keeping healthy bees to have successful pollination, to have good food security and food for feeding humanity. So that's really a part of our responsibility. Whenever we keep the bees, not only because that honey which we enjoy, but mainly for the other important contribution to our cropping system. Uh, as a manager, I have also to look at what I call it risk factors surrounding my bees. These risk factors, exposure. One of the things, if I have my bee yard already sick and I identified, for example, AFB, I know that really becomes high risk for bees coming and robbing these infected colonies. If I'm not going to treat it, I'm going to spread the disease across all my neighbors, and that will continue to spread from one bee yard to another bee yard, and the whole area later on will become infected. That's part of my responsibility. The other thing, say, for example, a new pest came. If you pay real close attention to your operation, you will be the first one to figure out or find out there's something wrong with your hives. And at the time, you have to report it to the authority so they can come and investigate. We've seen this actually early days in Varroa mites when it came in 1987. We find something really strange inside the hive, wings start to fall off and things start to look really abnormal. Once we start looking and at some samples, we identified there is new pest that's been discovered in the United States in 1987. Actually, we discovered it in Canada in 1990. Same thing for the small hive beetle. So that really helps us to early diagnosis and take care of the problem. So it's quite important at any time we open our hives to check our colonies to make sure our bees are healthy. And that's the focus of my presentation today. So how do you know a colony is healthy? A trained beekeeper can tell by examining the colony if it is healthy or sick. As soon as you open the hive and actually you listen to your bees, look around, take out the first frame, you start looking and focus on what you see. What we'll call it, healthy or unhealthy. Once I see a problem and I diagnose it right away, I might know what's happening right away, or might not. It depends on my experience. And in this case, I have to keep updating myself and learning how to diagnose this kind of abnormality in my hive so I can take care of those bees. Once I identify this problem, I'm not going to close the hive and walk away and say, next time I come back in 10 days, I'm going to look after that. You have to take immediate action to address the issue. So a beekeeper, experienced one, can easily stay in the top of the hive and recognize if there's any health issues and how the bees are doing and what are their needs. The other thing, keep in mind, looking at healthy adult bees, you can see a colony is strong. Having several diseases or at least one disease, that will really uh, hit the balance of honeybees are able to perform their duty and stay healthy within the colony. However, with all the diseases we learned about in recent years, we are seeing some neglect, and that really will tilt the whole balance towards the pest and disease and will take hold of the honeybees and the colony will collapse. When we start talking about collapsing colonies, it is not collapsing because there is no other reasons. Actually, when we start talking about colony collapse disorder, it took several years to understand that collapse. In my own mind, it came from failure of controlling Varroa mites. Here in Canada, when that colony collapse disorder happened in 2006, 2007, and started in some places across the United States, it happened the same year in Canada. We have also winter kill of the bee colonies went up to 35%. I have some operation in Alberta at the time, 75% of the bees were lost. By doing quick investigation and looking at samples of dead bees inside the hives, we found out Comophos or checkmate strips failed to control Varroa mites. So right away we knew that failure and that collapse, it was caused by failure of treating Varroa mites in bee colonies. And the balance of healthy bees versus unhealthy was tilted towards the pest because especially that Varroa mites, it took over the whole hive. So that's really tells us we have to maintain our healthy colonies. One of the things I learned over the years, actually this one I learned from a beekeeper in Ontario. I, I was doing my research next door to that person, and I always keep my mite farm for doing my Varroa mite research. I always call it mite farm. Please don't do it your own self, but that's for research. And that person was complaining the bees dying in that operation because Medhat has his own mite farm next to me. So we had really to go back to investigate and examine these colonies. So we brought the inspectors from the government, so that way they are fair people instead of Medhat looking at the bees. As soon I asked if I can go with them, I was invited to go with them. I talked to the owner because I would like to know how much damage I'm causing to my neighbors. It turned out as soon as we drove into this yard, we start smelling European foul brood. Actually, American foul brood, sorry, American foul brood. As soon as we start smelling that, we said, oh, it looks like there's American foul brood. The person was contesting because they said, no, that brood is healthy. I learned from that lesson. That person didn't know what healthy brood looks like. That's why I'm showing the slide. You notice here in this slide, eggs, we have larvae, good looking larvae. There is no discoloration. There is no scales. The capping here is proceeding accordingly in a proper way. And later on, we have all the capped brood here without any issues or symptoms of American foul brood. So from that time and so on, I try to include this picture all the time in my presentation about bee diseases. If you don't know what healthy brood looks like, how do you know it is sick? So that's something you have to pay attention to keep the bee health in check. I'm now going to focus on Varroa mites, which basically being considered not only in United States or Canada, but around the world, the most serious disease the honeybees ever faced in their life. With this Varroa mites, I have a small video here to share it with you.
We'd like to introduce you to the Varroa mite. Well, to be precise, we'd like to introduce you to millions of Varroa mites. Why so many? Well, when it comes to the Varroa mite, there's no such thing as just one. And if you'd like to see how an infestation starts, you need to look no further than your own bees, especially drones, as they're pretty social and like to travel between hives. Since Varroa mites don't have any wings of their own, they slip into hives by hitching a ride on the backs of adult bees. And for the lucky mite, the trip includes an in-flight meal, as Varroa mites will begin feeding on bee blood within a few minutes of clinging to the bee. Once they've entered the hive, Varroa mites slip undetected into the vulnerable, uncapped brood cells. This is where the mites lay in wait until the bees cap the brood. Once a cell is capped, the mother mite, like a tiny vampire, climbs atop the cocoon of the developing bee, tears open a hole, and begins to feed on its blood. Within 3 days, the mother mite lays her first egg, which always develops into a male. Then, she lays one female egg every 30 hours over the next week or so in her newly acquired home under the brood cap. And as each of these female mites mature, they mate with their brother. By the time the baby bee develops and leaves its infested cell, as many as 3 fertilized mites will emerge with it, and the cycle continues. Using this strategy, the Varroa mite population can grow as fast as the bee population it feeds on. But when summer ends and the bee population declines, the hive is left with a huge mite population, and that's dangerous. Too many mites in a hive will overwhelm and kill entire bee colonies. So what does that mean for everyone's favorite insect, the honeybee? Well, honeybee colonies with heavy mite infestations can't effectively pollinate or produce honey because they suffer from diseases and viruses transmitted by the mites. In fact, honeybees suffer from as many as 20 different mite-induced viruses, including the devastating deformed wing virus, which prevents them from flying.
All right. So I would like to share with you now, we know now the story about mites. One female mite can produce 2 or 3 mites, and every certain cycle of the cap brood for the workers every 13 days, she comes out with more mites coming out. If it is a drone, every 15, 16 days, they are going to come out with more mites. And actually the mites reproduction in drones, it's higher more than the workers. So in this kind of graph here, I would like you to pay attention to a couple of things. We have our bees actually start building up right now in winter, especially in northern parts of the States, as well as in Canada. Our bee population, it's about 7 to 10,000 bees wintering inside the colony. With early spring, they start building up. Mites start moving into the cells right before they cap and reproducing, and they keep the cycle every single day. In fact, if you look at the population growth here, it's exponential. It starts with 1 mites, they become 3, they become 9, then 81, and we continue doing that. There's some model actually expected 1 single female mite around February, March. By August, September, it can produce offspring from herself and her daughters and following up 1,500 mites. So far, this is quite important calculation of how many mites actually. It starts in the spring as very low infestation. By the fall or late summer and fall, we have high number of mites. Mites, we know it can kill bees. However, the most important part here, not only killing the bees, but injecting viruses in the bees. And those bees, even though we kill the mites in the fall, we will find out the virus already impacting the winter bees and kill them. That really brought to my attention our treatment model, which we are following in the United States and Canada, was built in a wrong way. We always say monitor, and by the end of the summer, early fall, treat your hives. We are actually treating the hive to kill the mites, but we never get rid out of the viruses which injected inside the bees. That's why having this kind of graph, there is another study was done actually in Canada, and we start seeing if you start with low mite infestation in spring and maintain the mite infestation, look at the blue line here, as low as you can get all the way to the end of the summer, your bees will stay healthy. Viruses will not move into the bees because there's no enough mites to do the job, and your bees will have better chances to get through the winter and survive the winter. For some guys, they say, well, my early spring mite monitoring showed 1 or 3%. If I look at the 3%, look at the black line here, actually, by the time I get to the end of August and mid-September, I have my number of mites will increase almost to 40 mites. So by the time actually the virus will be injected in the bees health will be compromised. I do my treatment, I kill the mites, but still my bees died. That's why in most of my presentations right now, and over the last several years actually in Canada, we moved our treatment, my treatment, from the fall into the spring. Even if you have 1%, 2%, up to 3% mite infestation or more, please use your treatment in early spring before the honey flow. Our beekeepers actually, by mid-February or the end of February, they start going out to the beehives, even though it's quite cold, and unwrap the hive, put the Apivar strips, and walk away. By the time they come back in late March, early April, that's about 6 to 8 weeks of treatment. All the colonies already free, almost free from Varroa mites. That single treatment in the spring will protect the bees all the way until August, September. And at that time, we can use secondary treatment in the fall to protect the bees from further development of mites through the winter. So I would like you to try this one. If you already relying on the fall treatment, shift your treatment from the fall to the spring. And that really will make a difference in your operation. And so far, in where I am at here in Alberta, and actually in Canada, almost 90% of our beekeepers use spring treatment for Varroa mites. And in the fall, that could consider secondary treatment. That brings us to the subject of monitoring. And you can get 300 bees from brood comb without the queen. You can use winter windshield washer. I understand at certain times some guys had some doubts in the winter windshield. The question was, in Canada here, we have winter windshield because of our temperature is minus 40 Celsius, and we have high isopropanol or alcohol in our winter windshield to stop it from becoming icy. In a couple of years ago, I was doing some research down in New York and New Jersey, and in the fall, I started using the winter windshield. I found actually it does not really have the same ratio of alcohol in the winter windshield. So I walk into dollar store, I bought some containers of isopropanol alcohol. For each jug of winter windshield, I add 1 quart of isopropanol. That really improves the efficacy of these products in washing the mites from the bees. Some guys like to use actually icing sugar. It's good way of doing it because they like to keep the bees alive. Um, However, the sensitivity of icing sugar, it is not as good as the winter windshield or the alcohol wash. So you have to consider that when you do this job. Um, what kind of options we have? Some people like to use formic acid. Some people like to use oxalic acid. Some they like to use Simovar. We have HubGuard. All of these 4 products being considered organic treatment to the bees. That's because the organic nature of these active ingredients. However, we have only one product. It's been active and still effective in the United States and Canada. We call it Apivar. The active ingredient here is imitraz. And so far, even the last test I tested in New York and New Jersey, Apivar still effective. The only problem I found out, some beekeepers only apply 2 strips per hive, regardless if it is 1 box of bees or 2 boxes of bees. If you read the label carefully, it will actually recommend 1 strip for every 5 frames of bees. That means if I have a nuke with 5 frames of bees, I add 1 strip. If I have a hive with 7 frames of bees, I will add 2 strips. If I have a hive with 12 frames of bees, I'll put 3 strips. And once you put the strips at the right position in the cluster, within 6 to 8 weeks, you are going to get that 95% of mite kill. The problem when some people will complain about Apivar is not working and there is potential of the resistance to imitraz emerging in some of these operations, especially the ones they are using the legal products, there is no problem with that. Those ones, if you are using the legal product all the time and no illegal use of other formulation, I guarantee you, you might still susceptible to the imitraz application or the Apivar application, and you can get good results with that. There's some question came through this time. There's some other, actually, before I move to the next one, there's some other options we can use also to help in our mite management in beehives. Having young queen, there's some stock already being sold around the United States and Canada claiming there's some resistance. In fact, so far, unless you follow certain protocols, there is no certain single stock does not require any treatment at this time. There's one stock or a couple of stocks, but you have to follow certain protocol to maintain the reinfestation. It does not happen, but you are always monitoring your hives to make sure you are in the top of your mite population. If the mite population exceed that 3%, the threshold we are talking about, at the time you have to intervene and use chemical application. So that's something you have to be aware of, because some guys right now, they are buying some stock and say, oh, it's mite resistance. Actually, by the proper definition, is tolerant, is not resistant. Resistant, that means they can survive the mites without any interference and using any chemical. However, what we have right now, some stock are what we call it mite tolerance. The mite will not develop at the same rate as regular colonies, but at certain time, it might require treatment using intervention by using some chemicals to knock the mites down and keep the bees healthy. Some guys, they like to use the drone traps. It's another good way of doing it. Can we afford to do it, especially in areas where we have short season, especially like upstate New York or in Canada? We have to be careful in terms of it might impact our honey production. Screen bottom board, I like to use it mainly for monitoring the drop or the dead mites. Some guys, they think that might help also in maintaining the mite population. I'd like to spend a few minutes actually in oxalic acid evaporation or sublimation. For oxalic acid sublimation, it has become really common, and recently we are seeing more beekeepers love to use this one because they think it's organic, easy in the bees, it's cheap, and inexpensive. This kind of treatment actually was first developed, I believe, in Russia and Germany, and later on it became widespread across the world. In this picture, you can see the first applicator for oxalic acid sublimation. This one you connect it to battery and you put 2 grams of oxalic acid powder, insert it inside the hive, the temperature will go hot, and the oxalic acid will sublimate into fumes and mix with the bees, mites will drop dead. Uh, the most interesting part right now, because there was one question, does oxalic acid really kill mites? Yes, oxalic acid not only knocking down the mites, but also it kill mites. How they kill mites? Oxalic acid, it's very low in pH, and that's the acidity. So once that oxalic acid either treated as dripping or as sublimation will get into the body of the mites and actually will cover parts of it, and the feet of the mites will be also covered with this material and will damage the feet of the mites, and it's almost like pickling the whole thing. Think about having a mite and drop the mites in acid. So basically it will burn the mites. We've seen that. There's some research has been done, and we did some histology on the mite body, and we start seeing actually the skin of the mites and the feet of the mites got burnt, acid burn, and after that the mites will die. But the problem right now, what we are seeing, these are some pictures of applicators from Europe. I didn't have the time to get all the applicators right now. You can see it in Facebook and every place. Everybody design his own applicator. Some of them actually they're using the torch. If we know oxalic acid, it evaporizes or is sublimate at 195 Celsius, 165 Celsius. How do you know how much heat is being applied to this pipe to burn the oxalic acid and send it inside the hive? So all of the stuff which is being used, all of these applicators that you are using a torch to heat the oxalic acid, there is no such way to control the temperature applied to the oxalic acid. Oxalic acid, it will be actually broken down all the way to carbon dioxide and water, and it does not have any effect on bees or mites inside your hives. How much of that will impact the efficacy of the colony? It depends how much of that oxalic acid broke down those kind of ineffective ingredient. Oxalic acid is going to be water and carbon dioxide. Some guys, they say there's intermediate metabolites coming out, formic acid. It can help. Actually, it is not high enough to kill any mites. That's why I enjoy watching the stuff and just in my head, keep shaking my head and say, how can you justify to yourself if you see any air coming out of that machine or that applicators, and you can stand next to it without even coughing or doing anything, how do you think that product will work against the mites? So all of these kind of products out there, and the market full of them right now, and everybody said, I tested the product. I haven't seen actually proper research is being done on the efficacy of those products or the applicators in the market at this time. Very few of them already been done. This study was quoted from Switzerland, and they looked at different machines, like the ones I'm showing here on the side. And you can see the only proper product give us good 95%. It was Varroa. That's the one was attached to the battery. The rest of the products, we have one product here, especially the one with using the torch here, we got 65%. So that's really not giving us a proper indication how much efficacy of these products can have inside the hive to kill the mites. More devices. So my take-home message here, please use products being tested in the market by researchers, and they can guarantee to you how to use it properly to get the proper efficacy. Having said that, that really, okay, I'm going backwards. So that's one we talked about, like the Varroa using the battery. One thing actually, if you read the label about this Varroa, in between hives, you have to insert the hot plate in icy water to bring the temperature down. You apply the oxalic acid and start heating again. I have some guys right now, they're trying to speed it up and move from one hive to the next hive. The temperature, we measured this one about actually last summer. And I found out the temperature went above actually 300 Celsius, 350 to 400 Celsius. I was standing next to the oxalic acid after I put it here, and I can sniff it, smell it. It did not really make me cough or anything, so I know now the product was broken down. So if you are using the Varroa with the battery, make sure in between the hives, you have to insert this hot plate in cold water to bring the temperature down. So once it heats up again, you are getting the proper temperature to apply the oxalic acid, so you can produce the effective dose of oxalic acid to kill the mites. That brought me into a situation here in Alberta. Most of my beekeepers are commercial at the time. We have about 300,000 hives. We have about 120 beekeepers. They own about 280,000 hives out of those ones. An average beekeeper will have about 2,000 hives or 2,500 hives per operation. Definitely, they are not going to hire too many guys to apply the oxalic acid using the Varroa, that hot plate. We developed a machine at the time to push the oxalic acid through hot plate in this contraption here, the green one. And we used computer fan to blow the air of the oxalic acid inside the hives. But everything was controlled to maintain the temperature between 165 to 190. So that way we avoid the breakdown of oxalic acid. Even though the machine worked nicely, and we tested this machine, and as a matter of fact, just to see the test here, one single application, we got 61%. Once we did the second application, we get about 94% of the mites dead. So that right away told me, if you apply oxalic acid under these conditions within the temperature range recommended for heating the oxalic acid, you can get up to 95% of the mites killed using 2 grams per hive. The other thing there's a couple of machines in the market. There's the ProVap and Easy Pro. These two machines, actually, they have heat control instrument here to maintain the temperature as recommended. One of the things actually from the first machine we developed some tablets, and that really made it easier for us to put the tablets in the cap and right away put it inside the cups of those machines, and it worked really nicely. That worked actually when I was doing some research in 2019 down in New Jersey. You can see this the Easy Vap. I'm using it, and we have the caps, fill them with the tablets, and put it right here, and it takes about 1 or 2 minutes to apply the oxalic acid vapor inside the hives. This is a machine. It's been commercially used by a lot of beekeepers. I don't see any heat control instrument to control the heat here. In fact, they are using air blower uh, to push the air inside the hive. One of the things actually with this high velocity hot air with oxalic acid, and they keep going back and forth, there is no control over the dose or the breakdown of oxalic acid. Even they develop now this machine because they want to get rid out of these cables and the generator and the pressured air. They start using the propane torch. It's the same issue. It is the same issue. You don't have a control dose to apply to the hives. I'm going to go over the next few diseases quickly. Nosema, mostly in northern climate, our bees will suffer from nosema, which is internal parasite for the honeybees that will impact the digestive system. They live inside the guts, and they impact the bee health. How do you see that? There are lots of fecal material at the entrance. Some people like to call it dysentery. Some people, they don't. However, the most important part here, you have to take a sample and examine the sample under the microscope to count how many spores of Nosema inside the bee colonies. The only registered product to control the Nosema is fumagillin. A couple of years ago, fumagillin was not available in Canada, but we brought it back, and actually now is available in the United States as Fumidil B. Again, this product, based on research, it can be effective against the Nosema infection. I have one student, just she's finishing up her master's degree. We found out in her research in Alberta, spring treatment is quite important for the honeybees to kill the Nosema. That will help the bees to stay healthy during the spring and build up their population quite fast. Fall treatment, it will be important for the bees to get through the winter. And this is just actually, she's finishing up her master's, but we, through her research, we have become more convinced, and we have data to support not only fall treatment for the Nosema, but as important as fall treatment, it is the spring treatment to help the bees to build up. There are some other products out in the market, lots of marketing claims about it can help it control Nosema. However, most of them actually they've never been recommended as treatment, but they call it bee health enhancers. And that's because there is no enough proof for these products to treat. But they say, well, it keeps the bees healthy, and that way they can combat the Nosema. Nosema is a pathogen. How can you combat the Nosema as a pathogen unless you have a treatment that will kill or stop the spores from developing and infecting the bees? So that's my 2 cents about the Nosema. The last part here is American foul brood. I would like to add, even though I don't have some slides, recently we are seeing more outbreaks with European foul brood, especially in some places in New York. Many provinces in Canada, we have this emerging disease. It's on all disease, but now we never really paid attention to it. But lately we are seeing more and more of it. It's been spreading in bee operations. It's not the American foul brood, but it is the European foul brood. So you have to look at the symptoms, take a sample, send it to the lab to confirm if it is European foul brood or American foul brood. One of the things about the American foul brood, if you are trained and experienced, definitely it has funny smell and you can smell it right away. But by the time you smell it in a bee operation or in one hive, you know it's too late even to treat because already it is spread. The most serious part of it, if you have your hive tool and the inspector's hives, and you take the hive tool without sterilization and torching the end of it before moving to the next hive, in fact, you are going to spread the infection within your own operation. You take it from one yard into another yard, and you can see it is widespread. Colony gets weak, and the bees start robbing it and spread this disease across a big region. And this is the seriousness of American foul brood. And just keep in mind, every single infected cells, it has 2.4 million spores. That tells you how much in one single uh, infected cells. And that really tells you all what it takes, about 40 spores, 25 to 40 spores to infect a larva with American foul brood. So it's quite important for us, as soon as we find American foul brood in our hives, to take action. The best action, by the way, it is burning the hive. Second action, irradiation. You have to contact also your veterinarian and your state inspector to help you to have some sort of recommendation or some way of managing the disease spread. The veterinarians right now, they are the ones to prescribe some antibiotics to be used in the hives, and they give you some recommendation and a way how to use the antibiotics in your operation. However, the best recommendation to stop the infection from your operation or spreading it is burning those hives. And at the time, you are going to get that recommendation from your state of culturist. Recently, we can find a lot of people trying to point finger where I got it, you or I. So in reality, that shows us as a bee community or beekeepers work together. We have to be responsible about our own bee health. It's not only affecting me, but also it can affect my neighbor. It can affect the whole region. So you have to take responsibility for keeping your bees healthy. So that way you maintain the health of the honeybees, not only in your operation, but your neighboring operation as well. So at the end of the whole thing, how can we maintain our bee health in check, especially for pests and diseases? You have to check your hives very often, and we always recommend every 10 days. Don't get excited if you are a brand new guy and every 2 days you open your hive, because that's more disturbance to the bee colony more than anything else. But it would be great if you check your hive at least every 10 days to 15 days maximum. Then as soon as you see symptoms, find out what kind of symptoms you have and what kind of concerns. If you can identify the disease, that's great. If you cannot, you have to take some samples and test them. Contact your state apiculturist or contact somebody who's experienced to help you to identify the disease, then take action. Don't stop to the next day or wait until the next time you inspect your hives. Uh, After a number of years, actually, you develop your skills in terms of bee diagnosis and finding out the best treatment for your hives. Uh, so I always teach my beekeepers in any class, talk to your bees. Bees always talk to you back. If you don't understand what they are telling you, you are going to run into trouble. So the whole idea here, all the time, communicate with your bees, find out exactly what the bees are telling you, and respond at the right time. There is no substitute for experience. If you don't have that experience, there are always being offered. There are lots of workshops. There are lots of presentation. Attend those ones and work to develop your skills to stay on the top of your business. I think that's where I'm at, and I hope you enjoyed this talk, and I'll be more than happy to answer the questions. So, Pat.
Okay, the Q&A box has 33 questions in it right now.
Oh, wow. Okay. I hope for the guys who sent a couple of questions about oxalic acid, I answered the question already. Oxalic acid kill. The variation in efficacy right now, it depends on the applicators and how you apply the product in your hives. I don't recommend any applicator does not have thermoregulators to maintain the temperature between 165 and 195. Other than that, all of these other applicators in the market, I wouldn't really recommend it. They are not tested properly. And if you have high temperature, the oxalic acid will break down into carbon dioxide and water. And that's your responsibility to find out what is the best machine to use in your operation to apply oxalic acid. What is the rough, one of the first questions here, what the rough estimate of all managed hives in Canada and how many packages are imported every year? The total number of hives in Canada has been increased actually in the last 10 years by about 20% or 25%. We are about 750,000 hives. Imported packages, it's about 40,000 packages. We used to import up to 100,000. About 70 or 80,000, but right now we import about 40,000 packages. Okay. How we know what Varroa feed on the fat body. Why aren't you saying the mites feed on bee blood? Why are you saying the mites feed on the bee blood? Actually, this study is quite recent, and that's what we used to know until Ramsey explained it better, and he did test, and yes, we agree the mites feed on the fat body of the adult bees, but also keep in mind we haven't really done a study to see the mites developing on the pupa of the honeybees still developing inside the cells. So the idea, it is not exclusively on the fat body. Yes, the majority of the food is on the fat body, but keep in mind the fat body swim in the bee blood, which surrounding the fat body. So there's part of that actually still what we call it the hemolymph. So, but definitely Ramsey's research give us more insights about where and what kind of feed the mites will feed on the honeybees. You mentioned the Apivar as for late winter treatment. What is your view of efficacy of oxalic acid late winter treatment? Okay, actually I mentioned the Apivar as early spring treatment, just to help you out. You can use it also in the fall. Oxalic acid, mostly we recommend it where there is no brood inside the hives, and that really matches the late fall treatment, early winter, when the brood production inside the hive will be restricted and limited. So that way we have higher efficacy of oxalic acid. From fall to spring, what treatment do you recommend in the spring? We recommend in the spring actually Apivar, because Apivar requires 6 weeks to 8 weeks. It is a continuous treatment for any mites emerging from the brood. They emerge with the bees, adult bees, and that really will help us to maintain the mites under control for a long period of time through the summer. So that's why we recommend it in the spring. Just 2 brood boxes. Actually, now in the spring, even though we went to 2 brood boxes, this is a good question. Most of the bees, actually, the 2 brood boxes will be getting up to the 2nd box, and the population of the bees will be covering about 8 to 10 frames of bees. So only will require 2 strips at that time. So reality, By shifting the treatment from the fall to the spring, we cut the number of strips. Instead of 4 strips in the fall, because 2 boxes are full of bees after we extract the honey and we still have the summer bees. In the early spring, actually our cluster coming from the winter, it's still about at mostly 6 to 10 frames, and that will require only 2 strips per hive. So we are still maintaining the recommendations. Do you monitor before treatment, before treating in early spring? We do some monitoring, but usually it's very limited because, again, the bee is right on the top. So most of the beekeepers, they take just a small number of samples. In every bee yard, a couple of hives, and our treatment, since all the bees will be going from one, like the guys will make split, move the bees from one bee yard to another yard to another yard. So most of the time we do what we call it blanket treatment. If you're going to start in applying strips to one hive, you have to apply to all the hive. So that way you don't have different mite levels at different hives at different time of the years, and the bees keep reinfecting each other from one hive to another hive to another hive. I understand some of my colleagues like to say, monitor each hive and apply and don't apply. This is mostly like community spread of the disease. Think about if you have feeding a lot of cows or animals in the same lot. If you have one cow or few cows start suffer from one disease, it's going to spread. We see the same thing right now with, say, what we learned lately, especially last year, was COVID-19. It can spread very quickly, especially what we are seeing right now. So most of our management system, especially in our operations, those large operations, we always recommend, if you're going to apply to all the hive within your operation at the same time. So that way you stop reinfestation and you have better control over all the bees at one shot. Again, the question came back, what do you recommend in spring treatment? We talked about Apivar. And your recommendation or last inspection in November, we have mite level less than 1%. We never have a broodless period. We began inspections on warm days in early January. Karen, our treatment. Oh, sure. Go ahead, Pat. Yeah, as I said, it's sure the mite population and the bee population development and dynamics, definitely it's different from California to Florida or Georgia or upstate New York or in Canada. So try to monitor your bees and your mites and to try to figure out when you have the lowest brood time and before the season of building up the bee population during the winter time to early spring. That's where you find it's a suitable window to apply your treatment, especially for Varroa management. So I hope that answers your question. There's a question about oxalic acid sublimation. It can burn the mite skin and how that will impact the honeybees. Definitely, it can impact also the honeybees, but keep in mind the honeybees' body is bigger than the mites, so the dose effect it will be different from smaller mite into the adult bees. We haven't seen, like I've been using actually oxalic acid for almost 10 years right now. We haven't seen the acid killed adult bees as a result of sublimation. We've seen some of it if we apply it as drenching, but over drenching, and the bees at the time will be flooded and with the oxalic acid in their body and can cause serious damage to the bees. Multiple application. So far, all of our research about oxalic acid sublimation It's only we don't go and exceed 3 times. I'm seeing and I'm reading a lot about some guys, they like to rely mainly on oxalic acid as the only single treatment for mites. By applying oxalic acid every 3 or 5 days, 5, 6 times consecutively, this has never been researched. However, the most we recommend 3 application. We haven't really tested beyond that stuff because we were not looking for oxalic acid as a main treatment. Always recommended oxalic acid as a treatment during the period where is very little broods outside the hive, so we have high efficacy, and you don't need more than at least 2 application back to back within 10 days. Third time you might need it, but other than that, we never really recommended to use it during the season itself for that excessive or successive applications. We don't know how that will impact the bees. Some beekeepers shared with me some of the results after applying the oxalic acid 5 consecutive times, once every 5 days, and they never reach that 95%, especially during the time when they have brood inside the hives. So the idea, oxalic acid by itself, if you keep repeating it, you are going to reach 95%. It is not correct. The only research was done in Italy. You have to stop the queen for at least 21 days from egg laying to create that broodless condition inside the hive. Then you apply oxalic acid a couple of times, you get 95%. So in your location, if you can afford to stop the queen from egg laying for 21 days, that's a problem. In Canada, we cannot afford that because our season is basically 3 to 4 months. If I'm going to stop my queen from laying eggs for 21 days, that means I am going to lose a crop. I am going to lose bee population. So that's where you have to be careful in terms of excessive use of oxalic acid and high expectation to kill mites. I believe any more questions here? Have you done any temperature checks on ProVap and EasyVap? Yes. Actually, if you use that the button down there in those machines and you can adjust it to 195 Celsius, that will break down a little bit of oxalic acid. However, what came out of it, it was enough to provide a good mite kill. And actually, I've been using it in lots of places, adjusted to 195, somewhere between 165 and 195 Celsius. You can convert it into Fahrenheit. Okay. Is the oxalic acid the same while they use the stuff from hardware store, which is wood bleach, but is oxalic acid? Yeah, it's I haven't really tried the oxalic acid wood bleach because here we have it as oxalic acid 99.6%. So I would not really answer that question because my experience, it's not really good about this wood bleach. Are you bringing the oxalic acid tablet to the market? Actually, we introduced them to the Canadian market, and hopefully soon we can bring it to the US. Do you put any Apivar strips between the 2 boxes? Big no. We put it right in the top box in between the frames, right where the cluster is. Some beekeepers would prefer to use pollen patches right in the top. That way we attract the bees to come to feed in the pollen patties. And at the time they will keep moving around the strips. So that way they contract the material to kill the mites. Okay, what are your thoughts about the effectiveness of fumigillin with Nosema cerana. 99% of the Nosema we have right now in Canada is Nosema cerana, and it is effective. I know there's one paper came out. In fact, the Nosema as disease is quite tricky in terms of the pathogenicity and monitoring the infection rate. And yes, fumagillin works against Nosema cerana, and actually the research my student did has proven that too. So I wouldn't worry about the difference between cerana and apis. Apis is no longer available or is no longer found in bees, but yes, it does help against Nosema cerana. The threshold for Nosema, actually so far, 1 million spores. And actually the recent research we did up here in Canada, it's still 1 million spores. We rather to do that monitoring for Nosema spores, actually early spring samples after the bees defecate in early spring. We can take the samples and monitor at the time the Nosema level in those bees. In the fall, we found it is not conclusive because there's summer bees mixed with the winter bees, and it depends what ratio of summer bees to winter bees. So your numbers in the fall are not conclusive to represent the Nosema spores per hives, per bee, sorry. Again, there's one question about the Nosema apis. It has symptoms similar to dysentery. Nosema cerana does not. Actually, we are finding both they have the same thing. And we can see it up here, especially our research has been done in Canada, and most of the time our winter bees during the cold climate, they stay confined. As soon as they come out, they start defecating, and we can see defecation and the entrance of the hives. You take sample of bees, you can find Nosema. So the idea about symptoms by using this fecal material at the entrance, it is not really a proper way of deciding, but we would like to take a sample of bees, grind them, look under the microscope, and count the number of spores. And okay, how long the female mites can live? There are some reports that can live up to 60 days or 75 days, so it can go through cycles of reproduction 3 to 4 times. Should you start in February or April for the first treatment? If I start in April for my first treatment for Varroa mites, actually we are going to have the dandelion coming, and some people like to make some honey from the dandelion. So I would rather to start as soon as the weather will permit. You can get into your hives in February, March, and count your weeks and go after that. Okay. There's a question about Nosema spores can be killed by exposure of wax and frames to sunlight. I don't really have good information about this one. My threshold for treatment of Varroa mites, actually, it's 3%. I know I have to treat it right now, but we consider 1%. It's a kind of a yellow light. So 1 to 3%, that really, it gives me the indication I have mite trouble. It depends also on what time of the year. If I am in early spring and I am at 1%, I would like to treat to make sure my bees will, or my mite population will not be too high during the honey production time of late summer. And at that time, I have to have the decision either treat or take the honey supers off. Take the honey supers off and treat, or leave the honey supers and wait and delay the treatment. So that's why I have to make sure. It depends where you are at. If my bee is going to the winter, I would rather to see my bees going to the winter with less than 1% mite. So that way, that will guarantee there is no mite impact on my winter kill of the bee colonies. Okay, if I have two deep 8 frames, 16 frames, would you use 3 strips as recommended? Yes. I think that, yeah, somebody was asking about the video if it's available on the internet. I believe it is, and it is not my own production, but it's available. Then, why is Apivar and Apiguard not recommended treatment for the spring? Based on my climate here, Apiguard will require at least 65 to 85 degrees for application, and we don't have that kind of temperature at this time of the year. Regarding HubGuard, HubGuard actually it does not require temperature, but actually it can work in the spring and the fall, but you have to monitor, and it has to be 2 treatments back to back once every 15 days. Keep in mind, in some operation, a trip to apply the treatment, it can cost money. That's why they also add to the cost of application how many trips it's required to go to the field to apply those ones. If you have your bees in the backyard and you can monitor and apply the treatment every 10 days, I believe that will be a viable option for the use of these products. One question, do you recommend using Apivar in March, even though you applied oxalic acid in December, which followed formic acid in July and September? Frankly, and it's a good question. All it depends on your mite level and the reinfection or infection from the mite bombs around your operation. So my monitoring system here, my monitoring results will impact what kind of options. Keep in mind, keep hitting the mites with different products at different time of the years. Unnecessarily, it can impact the bee health and the queen performance. So reality, I try to use as much as I could a product whenever is needed. What do you think of the application of oxalic acid as recommended by Randy Oliver? Again, some of this oxalic acid application recommended by Randy is still under research, and we are looking for better results to apply or recommend. It is still not registered with EPA or even in Canada with BMRA, and hopefully we can have enough data to support the registration. What's the time between the two oxalic acid applications? It's about 10 days. Do you have any experience with the heat treatment? No. And can I use oxalic acid in the spring every 4 days until the cycle is over? Again, as I mentioned, that would require at least 4 to 5 treatments. I would not really have any information how that will impact the colony buildup. I keep hearing about the half-life of imitraz is short, long until it's completely the way we are using imitraz, we are using it in the strips, and the reality with the special package in the strips and applying it inside the hives, I'm not quite sure what you mean by breaking down. Is fuming hives with mineral oils kill mites? It kill mites and bees if you can afford it. I believe at this time, if you have any question, you can email them to Pat and I can answer them. Again, thank you for your attention, and I hope you learned something today, and hopefully that will work out for everybody.
Right.
Thank
Thank you
you so
so
much.
much. Good night.
Good night. Thank you, everybody.